Nice. So we are going to be, okay, so we go ahead and just started the recording there, just that everybody is aware. Let me go ahead and wait for Zoom to disappear so I can press play on my PowerPoint. Perfect. All right, well, welcome everybody to week 3 of the 6-week series of multi-generational families eating well. Today we have 2 really good sections. The first one is going to be more on the salt and savory, as well as teaching us a little bit about how to be able to cook a little bit more understanding with herbs. So it should be a really, really enjoyable one. It was fun for me to prepare this one. And again, we are grateful for all of our sponsors, for the Center for Healthy Aging, as well as the Teach Me to Grow Healthy program, to be able to allow us to have this opportunity to provide this. This is the 3rd week. So for anybody that is watching this later on through YouTube, we just encourage you to go back and watch the previous 2 classes. You can choose either the Tuesday or the Thursday classes that are online. And these will be able to help us to be able to move forward and continue to be funded. Because of this being a grant funding, we do recommend to be able to either follow the QR code here, or you can go into the link follow below, and that'll be able to help us to know the pre and the post assessments. So before you start, if this is your first time coming on, just go ahead and follow the assessment beforehand, just so that we can continue to be funded. So I appreciate everybody being here. As well, we've had some great questions so far in the series, and I love questions, so I always encourage those if you ever have any. It is going to be Martha that's going to be monitoring all of those questions today, and I will be stopped at any point in time if you have any of those types of questions. For last week, we did have some good ones when it comes to understanding about snacks. And so the first one was kind of people were asking, well, is peanut butter a healthy snack? Are crackers, can we have those to eat? As well as we had a couple of questions a little bit more about insulin levels, diabetics, as well as a little bit of thyroid medications. So I'll break down a little bit of these as well. So the first questions were kind of peanut butter, is that a healthy snack? Sometimes it can be a little bit more calorically dense, higher in fat, a little bit of protein. Is it a good snack? What about crackers? Are there so many different types? There's going to be things that are going to be more the wheat thins, all the way to the Ritz crackers. What are going to be the healthy snacks? So to go refreshing from last week, I just want to be able to go over some of the basics for the tip 2. And that is just making sure that it's a balance. So if you are just spoonful feeding peanut butter into your mouth, I probably wouldn't recommend that, because it is a calorically dense type of food, or even things like nuts. If you're just eating a bunch of nuts, it won't satisfy you, but also it's not complete and it's not balanced, as well as the crackers, if you're just eating those separate. But if you got crackers and put a little bit of peanut butter on them, it'd be a little bit more of a balanced type of snack. As well, think of not just like carbohydrates and a little bit of fats, but think of other things that you can add in there. So if you want to do protein, carbohydrates, vegetables, fruits, even dairy are always great options, because having those components mixed up and blended, sometimes it's hard to get your fruits and vegetables in first thing in the morning. So if you wanted to have those as a snack in between your meals, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier. But overall, just remember, from a dietitian and from a dietetic standpoint, that when they use the words healthy or bad foods, so good foods, bad foods, healthy foods, sometimes these are just diet terms that people just put themselves into, and you start to demonize certain types of foods. And we just, more the terminology that's a little bit healthier, because overall it's just our lifestyle, is there's certain foods that we eat more of, certain foods that we eat a little bit less of. If we're trying to maybe lose a little bit of weight, the calorically dense foods like nuts or nut butters might be a little bit heavier on like the calorie range. So we may want to be able to just be monitoring that, because it's easier to get more of those because they're more calorically dense. Versus things that are bad foods, the only time I consider things that are going to be absolutely bad is either it has trans fats, or most of the time we sometimes have an allergy to things or an intolerance. So if you drink milk, and every time you drink milk, it gives you a lot of gas, it gives you bloatedness, and it just makes you feel uncomfortable, then it probably isn't the best thing for you, because your body is having to fight off what you just consumed, and it may be an allergic reaction. And anytime we have an allergic reaction, usually our body is fighting against whatever that antigen is. And over a chronic period of time, if we continue to do that, it builds up problems in our body. So we just want to be aware of that. Anytime it's a bad food, it's just because our body can't necessarily tolerate it. So if you have a fructose allergy and you love eating fruit, but then it swells up your lips and your mouth, that same type of thing. Everybody has different allergies and different intolerances, and some people don't have any. But learning what your body needs and learning what it can tolerate and not are super important. And so don't just demonize foods because diets say so, or, oh, it's a candy bar. Just if you have a candy bar, pay attention to how many calories there are. Is it going to be appropriate alone, or should you pair it with something else? And make sure that you're getting it balanced. So there's certain things you eat more of, certain things you eat a little bit less of. The next question was a great one, and I always highly, highly recommend, if you have questions and you have a chronic health condition, please talk to a dietitian, because sometimes the doctors will diagnose people and they may not always be the best source of nutrition knowledge. So because they know medications and they'll be able to help get you on the course for things like if you have to take metformin, if you're type 2 diabetic, or if you're type 1, your body is no longer creating the insulin that you need or an appropriate amount of it. So you then need to take insulin to be able to bring your blood sugars down so your cells can absorb that glucose. If you have a particular recommendation, like if the doctors say you can't have this 3 hours before bed, follow what the doctor says, because that is a medication. But know that there's different types of insulin. Some people, they take one insulin in the morning and it's a long-acting insulin. Some people have short-acting where they can take it right before breakfast or right before a meal, and then, or they can do it before and after a meal if they want to split it, depending on how much they're going to consume. And then there's also intermediate. So overall, the best thing when it comes to the insulin itself, because it is a medication, make sure to talk to your doctor. Make sure that you know what the recommendations are for that. But if they are saying that it's every 2 to 3 hours, the normal pancreas in a human body will produce insulin every time we consume carbohydrates. So if a person is grazing every 30 minutes, that pancreas is always going to be acting. Versus other types of insulins that are synthetic, you just have to be aware of what the recommendations are from the doctors and know what your endocrinologist is recommending. If you are a person that grazes more, if they gave you a recommendation that every 3 hours you can't take insulin but every 3 hours, then what I would do is, if you realize that you eat every 2 to 3 hours and you can't quite follow that, talk to your endocrinologist and have them update it, and they may need to adjust your insulin levels. Right here, this isn't the appropriate class for that, but I would talk to a specialist for that help. When it comes to another question we had was some great questions, was could I address the snacking ideas for when I wake up super early, like 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe I have low blood sugars, maybe I'm hypoglycemic, or I have to take thyroid medications. So how on earth do I manage all of this? This was a fantastic question last week. And so I just want to be able to break up, like the first one was about how do I get some good snacking ideas? A free resource that's online, and you can, this is one of many, is go to the My Plate. And then right over here on that right-hand side is My Plate Kitchen. You just go right in there into recipes, and it makes it really easy. They have 170 current snacks that you could just click on the course, figure out exactly what snack you want, and then you could find a nice balance of fruits and vegetables, those kind of a variety of different things. So if you realize I eat the same thing over and over and over, maybe try this tool. If you realize 170 of those snack ideas you just absolutely hate, or it's not part of your culture, pull out a cookbook. Go online and maybe play with Pinterest. If you have a certain lifestyle preference like vegan or vegetarian, those might be just ones where you might want to type those in, and they can help you to be able to find appropriate snacks that will help you get to where you want to be. When it comes to early risers, again, this is making it according to what you need for your body. If you wake up before that crow croaks and that sun is not even down yet and you're waking up, I guess the question is why are you waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning? If you need to snack, snacking on things that maybe aren't necessarily fats and proteins, if you're eating things like a piece of fruit or other things, that will help to be able to stabilize those blood sugars if you're waking up with low blood sugars. If you are then going to have to pair that with something like a thyroid medication, just be aware that if you eat something that's high in fat or high in protein, it slows down our digestive system. And just to be able to have an idea of what the thyroid medication is for, like the levothyroxine, just going right onto the thyroid.org, it is needed when you consume it with things that have just food in general. So things like calcium, iron, or other types of drugs or medications, it can then decrease the actual absorption of it. So understanding that concept, then they recommend to be able to consume it on an empty stomach 30 minutes to 60 minutes prior to being able to actually consume food. So if you wake up at 4, but you don't need to, like you need to just maybe have a quick snack and you're gonna be up and moving, then your body allows for that empty stomach after a certain amount of time, depending on what you eat. Then you can then take your medicine, or you can start with taking your medicine there and then eating. Just depends on when you want to be able to have your first meal of the day. So that is just one where this is going to be tailoring to you specifically to be able to figure out exactly what you need. If you need additional help, highly, highly recommend. If you have things like chronic health conditions like thyroid, so many people in Nevada struggle with Hashimoto's, thyroid, either hyper or hypo, diabetes, cardiovascular disease like hypertension, or any other kind of chronic health condition. If you're confused about what you need to be doing, it makes sense because there's a lot of information online, and it sometimes can be a little bit more challenging if you're not trained on where to be able to find those answers. And so I would just recommend, if you don't want to use me, just recommend talking to a dietitian, not just a nutritionist, because sometimes they'll just give you some fad answers. But dietitians are actually the ones that are certified, trained, and they are educated to be able to help people with a therapy called medical nutrition therapy, which they take their condition and they help you out. So this is just something to be aware of. And now moving on to our class.
Brandon.
Oh, go for it.
We do have a question about milk. What type of milk is the best for you?
So as long as you don't have an allergy, what we want to do is we want to consider the different types. So because we are talking about a multi-generational families, if you have kids that they are burning off a lot of energy, whole milk is not going to be a problem whatsoever. You probably want to get a little extra calories in them. However, the difference between whole milk versus 2% versus 1% versus fat-free is when you have dairy, you're going to get all the benefits of all of them the same, except for the level of fat that you have in it. And that type of fat is coming from an animal, so it's a saturated fat. That can be a little bit more heart healthy compromising. So what you would want to do is you want to have the lower fat options possible if you can choose those. But sometimes that can be a little bit challenging for people when you have to change up your diet. So if you're used to always drinking whole milk and you realize, I have some family history that have cardiovascular disease, maybe you want to shift over to a lower fat. If you go from whole milk to low fat, it's going to be a really big challenge when it comes to taste, flavor, texture. There's going to be some challenges. So what I recommend is weaning yourself slowly into that direction. Our family went from there to 2% to now we're at 1%. We just don't really care for the fat-free options for most of them, but making that shift helps you to become a little bit more healthy. It's kind of like even just, you don't always have to have the completely 100% lean meat, but if you shave off the extra fat, that can help to be able to produce a little bit more cardiovascular friendly types of diets. But yep, so that is what my recommendation is. If you have an intolerance or an allergy to dairy in general, I wouldn't recommend drinking dairy, but I would maybe switch it over to some type of either almond milk or soy milk, cashew milk. Always be changing those up because sometimes your body can build up an intolerance if you're drinking the same thing over and over and over. So even if you aren't intolerant to milk, having a variety of those and making sure that they're fortified and maybe unsweetened helps out a ton, because sometimes they'll add a lot of extra sugar and you don't need that type of added sucrose or sugar, table sugar into your beverages, but you can still get those benefits without all the sugars or the fats. But excellent question. Perfect. And if it's cool, we will go ahead and move on to our first section of the day. Is going to be lesson for cooking with herbs and spices. So this one is fantastic world class. Let me just go ahead and catch up to where we are. Awesome. So This is always a fun one. This class definitely had a lot of do you know kind of questions. And it says, do you know that many adults with their spouses or your friends have hypertension? So some type of irregularity when it comes to your blood pressure. Your blood pressure might be just slowly creeping up into the pre-diabetes or just the hypertension range. That in fact, right now, about 54% of Americans that are between the ages of 55 and 64 are, they do have high blood pressure. And then once you get to 65 and older, that bumps up between 65 and 80% of people. So there's a lot of people that have hypertension, and this is all about blood, the amount of pressure that your heart has to push to be able to get all the blood throughout the rest of your body. So things like if you are not staying hydrated throughout the day consistently, but if you simply go and you binge a lot of water really fast, that's a lot of fluid that your body has to now process. It's going through your kidneys, it's going through your liver, but it's your heart having to pump a little bit more, and that can raise your blood pressure temporarily. But over a period of time, when we have hypertension, it's a matter of chronically, are we putting our body through a lot of stress? Either are we not working out? Are we eating a very high salt diet or a very low hydration diet? So just different things to be able to kind of keep in mind that we want to be able to play with. And today, when we were talking about herbs, one of the benefits of herbs, or just there's tons of them, is herbs provide flavor and they add a little bit of color. So if you just realize, oh man, I love my seasonings, and a lot of them are usually salt-based. So seasoning salts like Lowry's or anything like that, barbecue sauce, or just table salt in general. There are so many other ways to be able to flavor foods so that you get a good variety. If you love going to Italian food or Mexican food, a lot of times the reason why they have certain specialty flavors is because of the herbs and the spices that they add to those. And so I just encourage you that the next time you're in the store, grab a couple of new ones that maybe you haven't tried before. If you haven't tried thyme or rosemary for a while, grab them and just be able to enjoy using those in your foods, because just the smell, the taste, and just planning to be able to cook with these a little bit better. One of the recommendations that I have is there's the flavor Bible. They have a Bible, it looks like the Bible, and it has like just different foods that you're cooking with. So if you're cooking shrimp and you don't know how to cook with it, it has shrimp, and then it has all the varieties of herbs and spices and vegetables and fruits that go really well with that type of food. So there's so many different ways to be able to use these, and we're just going to be discussing a few of those today. And so hopefully one of our recommendations and the objectives of this class is going to be helping you to be able to identify which types of herbs and spices and seasonings that you can use to be able to cook and to be able to improve the quality of your food. As well, increasing your understanding and your knowledge about the different types of herbs. So instead of only having to turn to salt or different types of salts, what other things can we do to be able to give flavor and enjoyment to our foods? And of course, if you've been with me before, plan, right? So creating a plan and how to be able to use new herbs and seasonings in your foods, because just simply throwing some sprigs of parsley may not be exactly what you're looking for. And so figuring out when is the best time to be able to use these will help out a ton. So there's a bunch of fun variety, and we're going to go through and I'll give a little bit of a tester for yourselves a little bit later on. I know Martha is going to go ahead and send out a couple of handouts for both of these classes for the people that are in the class today. And one of them will be cooking with some fresh herbs that will help out a ton. But herbs can be a variety of different sources. So it's not just the plant itself, but it could be the leaves, it could be the flowers, it can be the berries, the stems, the roots, or even the seeds of a plant. So there are varieties of different places that we can get herbs and spices from that give us a little bit extra flavor. So the question is why do we want to use herbs other than just flavoring things and making them more enjoyable, which is a huge thing, without having to compromise our heart because of the sodium intake? But by using the herbs and spices, sometimes decreasing the salt intake will just simply lower our blood pressure. Other than just the heart vascular thing, the question is how much salt should we be generally consuming in our diet if we don't have cardiovascular disease? So if we don't have hypertension, what is the recommended amount? And the good rule of thumb is look at your teaspoon, that smallest little one, not the big tablespoon, but the teaspoon. It is about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. And that is how much is recommended throughout the whole day. And so things like sauces, prepackaged foods, maybe chips, other things like all these different types of foods have a certain amount of sodium content. The fresher you are, the least you get. But again, you don't want to go so low that there's problems. You have to have a certain amount of sodium to be able to go throughout your day. If we sweat, we're sweating out sodium throughout our day. So the more active we are, sometimes we've heard we need to be able to make sure to stay well hydrated, but also have electrolytes. Part of those electrolytes are the sodium intake. So we have to just check our body and see where we're at. So don't go too low. If we're going all organic, all natural, no processed foods whatsoever, you can almost go so far one direction, you can start getting cramps. If you go too far the other direction, you're only having McDonald's and Burger King and fast foods and only eating chips, processed things, sometimes we'll have too far. So that happy medium is 1 teaspoon or 2,300 milligrams per day. And if somebody has hypertension, which is usually if their blood pressure is those numbers are 140 over 90, or if it's pre-hypertension. So if you start noticing when you go to the doctor, it's starting to creep up there, and that's somewhere, if you're getting between 120 and 139, so in that range, or for the big number, as well as for between 80 and 89, that is going to be just any of those numbers starting to creep up. You might be in the pre-diabetic range, and it might be good just to go into a little bit lower sodium diet for just a couple of days, and that's around 1,500 milligrams. So again, this is all playing with it. If you just check yourself and just see after today, you got nothing else from this class, and you said, he talked a lot about salt, so maybe I should check and see. And you start tracking what you're eating. You're not saying the calories, you're not checking the protein, but just simply salt intake. And you realize that you're at 6,800 milligrams of salt in a day, and you're having about 3 teaspoons of salt. Maybe what you want to do is start to slowly make that transition. Similar to milk, is you don't want to just go from really salty to nothing, because there's psychological components of food. So what you want to do is make that slow transition so that we can help our body to become healthier and healthier. Another reason why we want to be able to enjoy getting herbs into our body is herbs can further enhance our health. So not just the hypertension, not just cardiovascular friendliness, but there's other things like antioxidants. A ton of herbs have almost no calories, but they have a lot of antioxidants, which we talked about before. It's our body's ability in our cells to protect it so that we are fighting off the things that are trying to damage our cells, and it protects us against things like cancer or heart disease. And those are just some of the simple things that can be very, very beneficial. Another reasons why we want to be able to get a little bit more herbs in our diet is it helps us to be able to just freshen up the cooking. Because I always joke that you can have food storage all galore, but if it tastes terrible, it's going to be a really long time if you have to use old food. But if you have a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, as well as fresh herbs, or if you have dried herbs, so like you see in this picture, there's some dried herbs at the bottom, there's nothing wrong with that. Use the fresh or the dried to be able to have a little bit more flavor, to be able to perk it up and be able to make it a little bit more enjoyable. If we start a little bit later in life, sometimes it can be almost like things taste like they're spicy or just too strong. So slowly add them and just see what your tolerance level is so that you can enjoy them. Sometimes recipes will be almost like hitting your face too strong. So you want to be able to play with the amount. And if you're not used to using certain types of herbs, like here on the left is going to be rosemary, just be able to, that sometimes that can be a little bit more of a strong spice and herb. So you want to be able to slowly work your way into it so you can enjoy it. Whether you plant them in a garden or if you have a pot on your windowsill, we just recently ended up doing that. You can pick them up from the farmers markets, or even just going over to your local grocery store like Smith's or there. You can just really liven up your foods by just adding a little bit of herbs and spices into your diet. The good rule of thumb is that you want to use 3 times the amount of that you would do for fresh herbs as you do for dried. So if you have it dried and it's usually not as strong and potent, you usually want to use it a little bit about 3 times as much. So the same concept in reverse, you want to try to use about 1/3 of the dried as you would be for fresh. So sometimes the dried stuff can be a little bit stronger. Play with the amounts. Some herbs and spices are going to be stronger than others, but usually the 3 times is fresh for dried herbs, or 1/3 for dried for 3. So kind of that 1/3 rule. As well, the use of different types of herbs, sometimes you will use things like oregano or rosemary or sage or thyme. Sometimes they have the spices and the flavors in the stems themselves, or it could be in the leaves like the cilantro or the parsley. One thing that you can do is try cooking in it, and like if it's a stew, allowing the stems to be able to seep into the flavors, but then pull those out. Like bay leaves, you don't want to have this huge giant leaf that's dried out sitting in your stew. That may not be the most enjoyable experience when you take a bite of it. So play with them and use them as well. Some of them aren't just stuck in. You may want to roll it to be able to crush a little bit of the herbs and the flavors coming out, or slicing them with a sharp knife. Maybe you want to snip them, learning how to be able to use these if you have fresh ones that are growing on your windowsill. Because I know that in our family, we've done things like basil, and if you cut it just the wrong way, sometimes your whole plant can quickly die. And so learning how to be able to play with this, and this can be as simple as just adding it into your smartphone to be able to figure out exactly how to be able to keep these plants alive and how to trim them so that you can keep growing and using them. So as well, to preserve the fresh herb flavor, if you throw it in right at the beginning of cooking, sometimes you won't always get the most flavor because it kind of, all of it burns out. The aroma, that is going to be from very sensitive type of, this is going a little bit more into organic chemistry, but it's just aromatherapy. So what they usually recommend, if you have things like basil, chives, parsley, dill, or even marjoram or mint, you want to save it to the very last few minutes of cooking. Right before you serve it, you want to throw that into your meal, and that will be able to give it, preserve that flavor without breaking down the compounds that have it. So if you've ever cooked before and you throw a bunch of the herbs and spices in while you're heating it up, you'll notice that the flavor is very dull. But if you cook it at the very end and throw it in, it really livens it up. So you're not breaking down that aroma flavors. As well, mixing just fresh herbs can sometimes go straight in, or dried herbs into cold foods, such as dips or salads or subtypes of dressings can help out. And this can sometimes be because it takes, like for dried herbs, it takes a little bit of time to be able to seep in, especially if it's cold. So if you're cooking with heat, you may want to put it in right before. But with a cold ingredient, you may want to take a few hours to be able to allow it to seep into that flavor and really start to give a good flavor into it. So if you're making a dip and you want to throw a little bit of dill into for your chips and dip, you may want to be able to add that a little bit beforehand and allow it to simmer, not simmer, but to be able to allow it to release all the flavors and the benefits to it. In one of the handouts that Martha was able to email you, hopefully, is this great one, and it's just cooking and seasoning with herbs. And it kind of breaks down a couple of the basic ones. So if you want to just go through and just understand, when do I want to be able to have certain things and eat a certain way, these are going to be able to be a nice little breakdown for you. And so I will kind of break down some of these into a little kind of a questionnaire of like, okay, a little bit later on in our class, I'll be kind of doing a little bit of a testing of, can you spot what type of herb this is? And I'll give a couple of descriptions. And in that sheet will be kind of those answers to that kind of question. You can dry your own herbs if you'd like, or your herb blends if you want to be able to have like a certain type. If you realize that your plant is starting to go south, you can actually dry them out and it'll increase the shelf life, as well as it makes it very, very convenient. So there's nothing wrong with dried herbs as well as fresh herbs. It's just a matter of whatever is going to be the best. You want to be able to not let it like ferment and go bad. Make sure that if you have fresh herbs, they usually have a sell-by date, or if you start to see them starting to go south. Most of the time, like fresh herbs are going to be just a couple of days. So they're very, very short lasting, versus things that are dried have usually up to a 2-year shelf life. But even they will start to deteriorate over time and they won't have as strong of a flavor. So look at some of your herbs and spices. If you realize maybe you've had the same spice rack that your mom and your dad gave you from decades past, maybe it's time to be able to switch that out and get some fresh herbs and spices. Some of the locations, you can even get things like over at Costco, you can get a whole rack for really cheap, and they have unlimited, like you can get resupplies as many times as you'd like for like 5 years. And so I've used those many times, but again, you don't have to stock up like 10 years worth of herbs and spices because they may not always be the best when it comes to when you're trying to use them 15 years down the road. So about 2 years for dried herbs, just a couple of days for the fresh ones, unless you have them growing in your own house. So check out that handout if you're able to, because there is some really good benefits and helpful tips and tricks to how to keep yourself healthy when it comes to adding more fresh herbs and spices versus maybe decreasing the amount of salt that you're having in your diet, to helping those people with a little bit of heart disease. So let's go into kind of a overall kind of a game. You can just play this yourself if you'd like. You can throw it into the chat. Amy, if you're driving, please don't hurt yourself while driving. So you don't have to necessarily try doing that. But I'm going to throw in the first question is, can you spot what type of herb or spice this is? And I'll go ahead and give a description of it. And I want to see if you can maybe be able to pick exactly what kind it is. So I am rich, warm, and sweet. I smell strong with many different varieties offering of colors and scents. I'm often used in French cooking, Italian cooking, and Thai foods, such as tomato sauces, pestos, rice, and salads. The question is, what kind of herb is this? And if anybody knows, they're welcome to shout that out right now.
I've got a couple of things in the chat that says basil.
Basil, you are absolutely correct. So basil is a great one. So just think,
Amy.
if you were wanting to be able to enjoy this type of herb, that is a great one. I always just laugh that we, as Americans, we are so blessed to be able to have such a variety of different types of foods. So if you are wanting to cook things like Italian food, don't forget about the herbs. Don't just cook up a bunch of pasta in boiling water and throw in pesto. Like, make sure to be able to add the correct herbs and spices will really make it taste really like it'll pop. That's why you go to some of those types of restaurants, and they can really make things taste good. So maybe going into something that's a little bit more of a stir fry. So in a stir fry, I can be used and I can grate it into dishes, or I can even be put into a little bit of cookies or pies for a sweet taste. I have an anti-nausea or anti-inflammatory property. What type of herb or spice am I? And I know for a lot of us here, we're all kind of incorporated into a lot of cooking ourselves, or we probably are aware of going shopping. And so this one's probably an easier one. This one's going to be ginger. So this one's great. I haven't used a ton of ginger personally into cookies themselves, but maybe there's a few of you out there that have gotten to enjoy that. But I like the idea that if you are starting to have a little bit of nausea, I know of a lot of people that'll drink a little bit of ginger beer. Or if you're starting to having more of an inflammation, or if you've consumed something, ginger can help out a lot.
Ginger's great in cookies.
Oh, is it? What kind of cookies are the best with it, Martha?
Ginger snaps.
Oh, yes. For some reason, like my mom always makes chocolate chip cookies. So I'm thinking like either that or the peanut butter cookies. And I'm like, why would I add ginger to a chocolate chip cookie? But yeah, ginger snaps.
It would be interesting to add it to some other stuff. But yeah, the ginger snaps are really good.
Awesome. All right. For our little bit of more the Latin American culture out there, I am often used in the Mexican or a Latin American foods, such as salsas, guacamole, pasta, and dips. And we'll go ahead and go to what it looks like. And this one's always easy to see because it has the little fingers at the ends. And this one, I'm sure everybody's going to recognize that one. This one's going to be for cilantro. And so this one has that just a nice, powerful flavor. Goes really, really well with that type of Latin American culture. So if you love cilantro, this just might be a good one to be able to add into a little bit of guacamole, or if you're having some chips and dip at home. Ooh, Italian food, huh? But not just Italian, but more of, this one's going to be often used. So if you see it sitting right on top of those meatballs, it's usually in Mediterranean types of foods, and a little bit of it goes a long way. So it's nice and strong. It goes well with vegetables, beans, breads, as well as pastas. And one thing that's really, really good for this, actually, it's not the green one on top. It's usually cooked in the sauce. It has a positive effect in lowering our cholesterol. And so let's look at what this little herb, of course, this one, I feel like once you get to see the picture of it, it's so easy to be able to see. Garlic. Garlic is absolutely incredible when it comes to just helping maybe lower our cholesterol. Again, don't just eat an entire clove of garlic, but making sure to be able to incorporate that into our dishes to be able to have good flavors. I meet a lot of people that will do different types of supplements like turmeric and other things that are anti-inflammatory, but just remember, like, you could just incorporate these, cooking them into your dishes. I would much rather have fresh fruits and vegetables and good food than it is have to take a supplement or have to take something else if I don't have to. So just remember, there's so many benefits to getting these herbs and spices that they do have a lot of vitamins and minerals as well.
Hey, Brandon.
Yeah.
Just a random side note from Amy. She said that she freezes cilantro and then cuts it up from frozen into eggs and sauces. She says, best thing is I can use stems and all this way. And that's
wonderful.
Yeah, that's really great.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And that would probably preserve the everything in it. And if you just freeze it, similar to like I frozen spinach and it keeps it fresh, then I can throw that in and it crumples really well. So I would imagine cilantro would be very similar. So Amy, thank you. That is a great
thank you,
recommendation.
Amy. That's a good one.
Now this one I know, like this is like salmon. I know that a lot of times my family tends to have a hard time with cooking fish, but maybe we just don't know how to herb and spice it up correctly. This next one, you can see a little bit on the green one right on top. I have protective properties, is a very good antioxidant for your body and your cells, helping to prevent cancer and heart disease. It tastes really, really good with different things like seafood, poultry, as well as vegetables. And this is actually one of my own personal favorites because this plant we just have growing in our backyard and it can start to go a little bit crazy, but we always tend to have quite a bit of it. And this one's going to be good. It is rosemary. So a little bit goes a long way, but it has some great, powerful antioxidant properties.
Lemon and capers. And again,
if anybody has any tips and tricks.
Yeah.
Lemon and capers?
Lemon and capers for fish. Very good.
Ooh, lemon and capers. Excellent. Oh, and this is one that I will warn everybody. Once you grow a little bit of this in your backyard, it tends to spread everywhere. So I am a perennial in the garden. I always smell great. You snip me into soups, dips, into potatoes or salads. And it comes out and it grows in nice long bunches of it. I think our family, we have so much of it. We have to always keep cutting it or else it starts to grow the little seed pods and stops. But these ones are chives. Chives are absolutely fantastic. Just really, really good flavor. Once you plant them, they just keep coming back. So really, really helpful if you love to cook and spice. Now this one is if you like a little bit more stronger flavor, this one's going to be good because it goes into things that are going to be more of like Indian dishes or different types of curries. So did you know that this specialty one that's maybe if you can see it right on top, it comes from the plant derived from coriander. And it's used in Indian dishes, sausages, stews, sweet pastries, as well as it has a good flavor when it comes to lemon as well as sage blends. And this one is going to be our cilantro. And this one, again, if you love to be able to have a little bit more of a flavor, that would be helpful. And I think this was a kind of when they had this initially created is for it to be a tiebreaker. So if people didn't know which ones to do. So overall, kind of as a summary of the herbs and spices themselves is just give it a try. If you like Amy recommended, throw maybe a couple of the cilantro in the freezer, preserve it so that you can throw a little bit in with eggs and flavors. If you are going to be making dips, it really makes them pop up. If it's going to be heated, make sure to add that just at the end so that you're not burning off a lot of the aromatherapy. If you are going to be adding it to a cold dish, whether it's dry or fresh herbs, give it a few hours to be able to really steep in and have that good flavor really come out into those dips and those salsas, or even into just dressings. But these are just a couple of the tips and tricks to be able to help give us a little bit of a benefit. And as always, because sometimes these classes can become a little bit long, if there's any questions or other tips that you absolutely love with herbs and spices that you want to share in the chat, feel free and add those below. And we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back at 10:53. All right, we'll give it about 30 seconds and we'll go ahead and start back up. All right, guys, so welcome back for our second part of our third class of the series. And this is going to be the class on savory soups, or just understanding a little bit more about salt and making sure that we understand and kind of are able to identify what different types of salts are out there, and not what type of different salts, but how to be able to spot when places are trying to sneak them in, and how we might be able to help keep our bodies as healthy as possible. Just as we have talked about in the past, and I always like to just kind of reiterate, the things that are the most important is as we age. So if you have the little ones, if they're having a bunch of like high fat foods, like going to be having a lot of whole milk or fatty foods and stuff like hot dogs, they're usually they're not at the risk of cardiovascular disease at their age. But with the tricks and the tips that they learn early on and they see us do as their parents and as their families, they will start to take that into their lifestyles. And so sometimes there's that concept of, is it genetic or is it habitual that you've seen mom start to stress out, so she eats a certain way? So we want to be able to make sure to be able to protect our kids by eating as good as possible for ourselves to be able to protect us. And today, because cardiovascular disease, hypertension, stroke, they are some of the top big killers in America, and especially in the populations of the Native Americans, African Americans, in the Latin cultures. These are at higher risk, especially for the hypertension or high blood pressure that we've talked about in the past. And a lot of times this can come just as we age, is we become less flexible, right? We become a little bit more stiff. Well, our arteries become stiff as well, and they become a little bit more thickened. And over high sources of sodium in our diets, this increases our blood volume. Have you ever consumed a really salty steak and you went to an Outback Steakhouse and enjoyed just a nice savory steak that they have? The next day, if you ever look at the scale, it'll go up with water weight a couple of pounds. And people think, oh, I just went out to eat, I must have eaten a lot of good food. It's not necessarily the food. You don't gain that much fat overnight. It is usually a fluctuation of water weight, because if we eat a lot of things that are high in sugar or high in salt, that will cause us to be able to have an increased blood volume. And that can be a lot of pressure on our heart to be able to try to pump that throughout the rest of our body. So in this lesson, this second portion, our goal is to be able to increase your knowledge as well as confidence in understanding and having a better informed decision on when we see foods in our life. How do we make it a little bit more healthy choices when it comes to lower sodium options so that we can meet our dietary needs? So going into just understanding a little bit about the blood pressure, we've already talked a little bit about the arteries and veins. So today, really, I just want to be able to help improve that confidence with you. This class is going to be a little bit different. Instead of it being all lecture-based, it's going to be more of like, it's going to show a picture and it's going to almost be a guess. If you were to guess how much sodium is in that, so think of our teaspoon is 2,300 milligrams, how much salt is in a given thing, and then it'll compare it to maybe a better option. So we just want to be able to help improve our quality of understanding of where salt is at. And so the big goals of today, after attending this section, is to be able to identify where is the highest amount of salt when we are in the grocery store. I identify one or more foods that we can maybe start to work with to be able to help either reduce or prevent a little bit of blood pressure by just improving the quality of our foods. And the last one is identify ways that we can maybe prepare salts, like soups, with not as much salt. So we already talked about herbs and spices. Maybe we can find other ways to be able to make this a little bit healthier for us and our families. So today, we'll be reviewing just overall little ways that salt can sneak into our diet that we don't even know. So this is just more of like just an FYI, where are we just slowly getting salt in our diet? Because if you think, oh, I don't ever really add a lot of salt to my diet, how would I have too much or too little. And just being aware of where it might be coming from helps us to be able to be conscious of it. And at that point, we can then take action to ourselves. But the people that are most risk, again, are going to be sometimes the minorities that are the African American or American descents, as well people that are in the Native American cultures. So we want to just help prevent any kind of challenges that will come before they do, so that we can keep our body and our family as healthy as possible. So if you're not eating well for yourself, think of your kids, think of your grandkids. This is why you want to teach them, because if your kids or your grandkids always remember, oh, well, I don't really need to, because I think of my grandfather, and he didn't have the best heart or health condition, and he loved his bacon every single day, high saturated fat, high in salt, and just seeing a lot of that. And so our families learn from us. So teaching the kids while they're young by our healthy eating habits, it's good. It's good to be able to say, yes, we want to be able to do certain things, but our actions speak very, very much louder. So one of the things that I have had Martha send is called the sodium hunt. This is going to be a form that I want you to go through and just maybe start to play with and just give yourself some guesses when you're going through it. And then here, we're going to go through and just take some questions. And I want you to just start to think if you know what the answers are. So my first question is okay, where's the largest source of our salt in our diets in America today? Because if you're not adding it to your foods, where are we usually getting it? And this can be from a variety of different locations, but a majority of them are going to be when we eat out, when we go out to restaurants, they want to make sure things taste nice and savory for us, nice and tasteful. They have all the herbs and spices, but they also add a lot of salt. So we tend to get a lot of it when we're eating out, but also processed foods. So if you think of like your deli meats, your lunch meats, things that are canned or processed of any kind, if you're getting it from a box, usually it has to have some kind of preservative. If it's not high in fat or high in salt or sugar, it's usually high in salt. So there for a while back in the day, there was like a war on fats. So everything became fat free, but it became very high in salt and high in sugar. And now years later, we have increased obesity. There's challenges there. So we want to be able to make sure to try to protect ourselves as much as possible. So just be aware of like when you're eating out, even if you're trying to eat out the best way possible, maybe just decreasing the amount that you eat out is going to be a little bit more helpful. And different types of salt. So what is 3 minerals found in foods that are useful for blood pressure? And this is specifically to reduce the blood pressure. So we now know sodium increases our blood pressure. So just think in your mind, what are those 3 things? And I always remember that this was a question that was specifically like when I went in to be interviewed to become a dietitian, this was a specific question that was asked by my actual internship director. And these ones are just very, very important to recognize that they're the electrolytes. They are going to be potassium, magnesium, and going to be our calcium. So potassium is found in a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. So I think that's why a lot of times if we have you eat a lot more fresh fruits and vegetables, you're eating less processed crackers and chips. And so you're getting more potassium, less salt, automatically helping with heart disease. As well, magnesium. So many times I have people as a therapist, they will come to me and they say they have a lot of cramping and the doctors gave them magnesium. But also calcium is very, very important because that is essential for our bones to keeping us strong and healthy as well. The next one is a good one. It comes into, well, what kinds of food sources are helpful for these types of minerals? So if we're wanting to be able to consume those, I think I already talked about it. And I think you could probably just kind of take a guess of when it comes to potassium, fruits and vegetables. We want to be able to get as many of those as possible. If you can't get fresh, canned, frozen, dried, whatever you can, there is going to be in fresh fruits and vegetables are going to be usually good when it comes to potassium. For calcium, we have good amounts of that. It comes from our yogurt or our milk or anything that's going to be fortified. So those are going to be things like our soy milks or our cashew milks. If you get just the plain kind, sometimes they're not fortified. So make sure if you are using those as your dairy option to make sure to get those as a supplemented option. And the last one is our magnesium. things like beans and nuts. So don't overrule the nut option because they are high in fat or high in calories, but bean options are also fantastic. You want to throw some beans into your salad and make a taco salad, or if you want to be able to have refried beans or different things, there's so many different options for these. Just being aware sometimes with beans, if they're not cooked fresh or hard, if you are getting them from a can, just be aware of where you can actually find these. You always want to look for the cans that are lower sodium or no sodium added, just to be able to make sure that you're not getting a huge amount of that added to your diet.
And Brandon, isn't there magnesium in apples?
There are, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So that is a good source of it as well. So, and again, there's a broad range of varying types that you can just go through and break down a nutrition label to see in different foods that are fresh fruits and vegetables of what different nutrients there are. And that's why I always recommend, don't just have, like, if you love apples, great, have a variety of different kinds and then switch it up and now have other types of foods. When you're eating the same thing over and over and over, your body's only getting the nutrients that is for that specifically. So you want to be able to have a variety. So yes, there is going to be a little bit of magnesium as well as some of the other ones in the certain fruits or certain vegetables, but getting a variety is going to be usually helpful. This one's a good one. And the question comes is, so we talked about already the 2,300 or a whole teaspoon. So in this tablespoon and about a teaspoon of salt, is 1,500 milligrams or 2/3 of a teaspoon recommended for a person with high blood pressure? And so I think we talked about before, a healthy person or a healthy individual, the Heart Healthy Association recommends that teaspoon, so 2,300 milligrams. But if you start to have high blood pressure, you want to decrease that. And so that answer is yes. You want to have even less than what you would have if you already have it, or if you're kind of leaning up to it. Usually a good way to kind of check this out is, do you have edema? Do you have swelling in any of your appendages or in your feet? A lot of times people start to get swelling, and I always think there's something going on with either your kidneys or some kind of fluid in your body. So maybe going on a lower sodium diet for a given period of time can help reduce that. If you go to a doctor, if I'm a dietitian and you're in the hospital with me, we have to drop that salt level to a certain level. And a lot of times people complain, they say, these foods don't have any flavor whatsoever. And it's hard because sometimes people don't use herbs and spices, because if we add those in a hospital, they say it's too spicy. But then if we don't add salt, they say it doesn't have any flavor. So it becomes a bit of a challenge. So if you start to make that shift now, you will start to, you'll improve your quality of life now before you go into the hospital. So that's why I love, as an outpatient dietitian, I don't work in a hospital. I love to be able to help try to prevent people from having to go there in the first place. So definitely try and prevent it. It goes a lot longer. I always joke that you can go for $10 to a gym. You can go walking outside for free. You can go to a therapist, maybe a chiropractor, for somewhere between $50 and $100. But if you're to be able to repair yourself, if you hurt yourself, if you need surgery, now just keep adding zeros and it just keeps going worse and worse. So prevention is so much better. So it just makes it a little bit easier for you. So what is a dietary recommendation when it comes to blood pressure as well as weight control? So I think we've talked a little bit about a couple of these pictures in the past. And so there is a variety of different things that we can do, but there's a specific type that they have found when it comes to a randomized control studies. So those are like the gold standard for dietitians, where somebody is unbiased, they go through and they test it. And the recommendation is the DASH diet, which is a lower sodium type of diet that goes into more oil-based rather than saturated fats, lower fat milk, where you're getting more fresh fruits and vegetables, you're having grains. So really kind of what we're talking about throughout this entire class is essentially the DASH diet, but breaking it down so that people can be a little bit healthier in their lifestyles. So little tips and tricks to be able to lower our blood pressure. The first one is going to be limiting the salts that we add to our foods. The largest source of our dietary intakes is from processed foods. That is about 70%, from canned boxes or eating out. But what about the rest of it? So about 10 to 25% of other salt can be found from just a salt shaker. If you add a bunch into your salt shaker, or just 10% is going to be consumed naturally. So just be aware that 10% of our salt usually has come from just natural sources. So if you are, maybe we're going to eat out. So I'm saying like COVID has now slowly starting to open up. We can eat out again. Talk to your waitress, talk to your waiter and ask them like, can you add no salt, or can you cook that with no salt to my foods? And you'll be amazed. Like just that simple recommendation is, if you go in there and you just ask it. If it's fast food, it makes it a little bit harder. But if you're eating out and you're going to a restaurant where they're cooking all the foods fresh for you, you can't really control how much salt is in the sauces. But like the things like on your steak, they already have a little bit in there. But if you ask them not to add extra salt on top of it, then you're not having to double salt it as well. Just listen to your body when you eat it. And I hear Martha.
Yeah, Brandon, sorry. Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat. One, perfect. Is there one fruit or vegetable with all potassium, magnesium, and calcium in it? And also, is sea salt healthier?
Those are great questions. So what I'll do is I will break down a couple of them. When I do next week's class, I will break down a couple of fruits and vegetables just to compare those, because there are ones that have a good variety, but right off the top of my head, like there's not a magical fruit or vegetable. So that's why you want to be able to get a variety in your diet. But I can break those down and I can show those three components and what each like kind of, and I'll just pick maybe 5. So if you have certain ones in mind, whoever asked that question, you're welcome to put those in the chat, and then I'll incorporate that with pictures and do all the research for next class. And I'll say, okay, in a serving of apples, here's how much magnesium, potassium, and phosphorus are in this types of food, or calcium. But I'm pretty sure that calcium, there's probably not as much, because that's going to be more from dairy, and like that's for our bones. And so there might be a little bit, but not as much. So, but yeah, it would be an interesting study, and I'd be happy to look that up. And then there was a second part to that question, which I think I can answer.
Is sea salt healthier?
So sea salt is fantastic, but it's going to be, so this was a question, and this was like the theory or the stigma that if I add sea salt, or if I add different types of Mediterranean salt or different things, there's a reason why they add iodine to our salts, is because a lot of times, how many people do you know have thyroid challenges? It's because we usually need to have a certain amount of iodine to be able to make sure our thyroid gland works well. A lot of times before we actually started implementing that, the thyroid gland would swell and people would get goiters. And I'm sure you've seen a few people in your own lifetime, I've seen them, where their neck will start to swell. It's because their thyroid gland becomes hyperactive and it swells up too much and it doesn't get enough salt. So be aware when you start to switch out of table salt that has iodine to other ones, just make sure you're getting sources of iodine in other locations as well. So if you are eating out, if you're going completely fresh, like I think that we had an individual that is sprouting their own grain, drying it out, and then making it. If you are at the point where you might be doing that, you might be having very whole, all organic, fresh and everything. Just be careful of cutting out all iodine salt, because if you're not getting processed foods of any kind, that can be a little bit of a challenge because you're not getting the iodine. So I don't want thyroid to become a challenge in the family or into your kids. So just be aware of that. Iodine is a very important thing, and it's not always found in other foods. So just be aware of that type of balance in our diets. Okay. Excellent questions. Thank you. Number 2 is having the more fruits and vegetables as well as dairy and nuts will help out. That is what the balance is when it comes to the DASH diet. Is the DASH diet is named DASH, is for dietary approaches for stopping hypertension. So literally to be able to help us with that. When it comes to dairy, we want to try to shoot for between 3 and 4 servings of low fat or skim dairy a day. Or if we're having yogurt or cottage cheese, just so that we can make sure to get our calcium. So for our bones, to be able to make sure they are nice and strong. For fruits and vegetables, we want to try to get a variety of those. Again, that big hand 5, we want to shoot for 4 to 5 fruits and vegetables a day. That is for our potassium. For magnesium, those are going to be between half to 1 serving of beans or nuts a day. And again, look at the amount of serving each one of these are. So beans are going to be a little bit more fiber-based. So sometimes like beans, a magical fruit. The more you eat, the more you chew. So it has a little bit more fiber in it. So it gives a little bit more gas. But the nuts themselves, just be aware of how much a serving is. So I think I asked somebody to check that out before. When I looked at peanut butter, it was 2 tablespoons. And that was for like 150 calories. So just be aware of the amount there is. Sometimes it's really easy just to grab nuts and just start consuming a lot of those really easily. And that's a way to be able to put on a little bit of weight because it's so many calories so quick. As well, just some tips and tricks when it comes to beans and nuts. Again, just try to cut those down to just a tablespoon or so, or maybe a couple of them. The last one when it comes to lowering our blood pressure is limiting the salt to at least 1 teaspoon or that 2,300 milligrams. If you can, try just limiting the amount you cook with or just adding no salt and just see how your body starts to slowly acclimate. What's funny is my family started doing this a while ago. And when we go out to eat, it almost is like we're eating a salt lick when we go to a restaurant. So we almost joke that it's easier for us just to cook a better meal at home than it is to go out. But again, making sure to get a variety, that you're not just go completely none of the iodine salt. So if you tend to eat out a lot, maybe having the sea salt would be a little bit better because you wouldn't have the iodine, but you're getting the iodine from other sources. But I think I didn't quite finish that answer. Was the sea salt, the percentage of sodium, we were thinking that it was going to be a huge shift. Sometimes like, oh, if I get sea salt, I can eat more of it because it has less sodium. And really the percentages, when we compared it, we broke it down to 20 different types of salts, from Himalayan pink salt to sea salt. The ratio of it was only within only maybe about 3 to 5%. So there really wasn't a huge percentage difference when it says like, oh, it's 38% sodium, maybe it went up to 39 or 40% sodium. There wasn't a huge shift. So I don't think that it's enough to be able to say like, okay, well, you can have a teaspoon and a little bit more. It's not enough to be able to then calculate. So usually with those types of herbs and different sea salts and different types of salts, those are for general personal preference and flavors. So that if you're already going to add a little bit, maybe it has different minerals and different vitamins that are going to be in those salts. They have different flavors. So I know I have a friend of the family that loves to be able to make their own ketchup. And I ask them, well, how do you get the tomato flavor out of it? And they say it's always about the different type of salt you use. It's not just table salt, but they have a special salt they use. So playing with the different types of salts can definitely help out as well. Now, things like soups, the way to be able to kind of keep an eye on these, if you have a family member that just absolutely loves their hearty soups, is look for the low sodium or the no sodium options, as well as the regular one that you usually buy, if you haven't shifted that down, and maybe add one and mix both cans so that you're slowly getting less. If you just go completely to a non-salt or a low sodium option, sometimes again, it's too big of a switch. And your family members may say like, oh, it doesn't taste good. I don't like it. And so if you slowly make that transition and you kind of add it into it, it can help to be able to cut that out very, very quickly. As well, checking food labels. So food labels is a big one. If you look at it and on the far right side on the daily value, it says it's 5%. You may want to be able to just keep an eye on it because you want to be able to try to have the magical numbers about 140 milligrams of a serving per or less. So if you see something and it has 300 milligrams of salt, just know that's going to be a really high salty type of food. So you want to balance out what you're eating the rest of the day. If you're already having salted nuts and you're having then chips, like there's certain times to be responsible for your own health. So just try cutting back on simple things like chips, fried foods, fast foods, lowering your salt intake and fat intake. Those things can be able to help just lower your blood pressure in general. As well, this is a fun little kind of a fun game. And this one goes into, it'll show a picture of a food and it'll say, do you think it's going to be higher or lower? If we had kind of in person, I would probably do this as a fun little game. And I just want you to kind of just test do you think that it's going to be a certain amount? So let's go into just kind of go into some canned foods or just other processed ones. So the Jolly Green Giant, right? I remember my sister had the nickname of this when she hit 6'3". How much do you think a normal can of green beans would contain of sodium? Do you think that it would be 400 milligrams per serving? Is it higher? Is it lower? And so when we go into it, it's not much lower. It's actually going to be 380 milligrams. So just think, okay, if we have this option, there is quite a bit more sodium in this because it's sitting there and it's preserved. If we go over to the grocery section and we get the fresh kind, there's no salt added. There's none. So just naturally, there might be about 10 milligrams of salt in the same amount if you were to just cut this fresh. Or if you get it from the can, look for the low sodium options, and you can also rinse them. Sometimes the rinsing doesn't get all of it out because the salt will permeate into the membranes of whatever vegetable you're consuming. But just be aware, like something as simple as you went from something that you had canned green beans for 340 milligrams to 10 when you're making it at home, and throwing in your own herbs and spices to be able to give it a little bit more flavor. What about when you go out to eat or there's a little bit more frozen vegetables that have a sauce, right? So we're cooking at home. We have a quick grab and go one that we have that cheese sauce that really comes with it and it tastes nice and good. Do you think it's higher or lower than 350 milligrams? It's almost like Jeopardy, right? Or I think with Bob Barker, right?
The Price is Right.
Is it higher? The Price is Right. There you go. Price is Right. Is it higher or lower
I say
than
higher.
350 milligrams? Think it's a little bit higher? Actually, it's not too bad. So some of them are a little bit lower. So it's only 180 milligrams.
Oh.
So just things to be aware of. But if you get it from just pure frozen with no sauce added, you can create it so much. It's almost literally half. It's 96 milligrams. If you have it just the natural salt that comes with the vegetables themselves with no sauce. Then from there, you can add your own, maybe add lemon, or you can add different things that will be a little less sodium. You can even do balsamic vinegar that are going to be just different options. Ooh, how about the TV dinners? I know there's a whole generation of families that either live on TV dinners. And I always joke that like really the difference between this and Jenny Craig or some frozen Weight Watcher meals or other ones, like they always try to go for calorie and portion size, but they don't always check on when it comes to sodium. So let's do 370 milligrams. Martha, do you think it's higher or lower? I think this one will surprise all of us. So just for a simple one, like chicken cordon bleu.
The outside of the box is 860. Holy crap.
860, but that's per serving. So like that may be for the whole box itself.
Oh.
But yeah, higher than 490. So like there's 2 servings in this, that is a lot of sodium. And so just think like, okay, if I'm going to be eating 3 of these, and these are going to be my entire meal for the day, I mean, for 300 calories, you're getting it for 860 milligrams. Like you got to be careful on how much sodium we're consuming, especially in these processed ones. Or the pre-made soups. You always have to be careful because they'll have, I love the different marketing. They have low fat, only 110 calories. They have this like different ones. So usually you want to try to find ones that are going to be a little bit more heart healthy. So compared to 400 milligrams, do we think it's going to be higher or lower?
That's probably in the ballpark, maybe a little lower.
So this one's a big surprise. This one's actually quite a bit higher. This is almost 1.5 times that same amount. So almost 700 milligrams of salt would be in one of these. So especially beef stews and stocks that are a little bit more concentrated will be quite a bit higher in salt. So be careful on the processed ones. Very simply, just look at the ones that are going to be more heart healthy. They'll usually have a little heart on it, low sodium options. If it does not say low sodium, it's not low sodium. So just be aware of that when it comes to canned or fresh foods. These ones are very popular in the American diet is potato chips. So 300 milligrams, I think I actually looked these up before. And I was actually surprised that it wasn't as salty as I thought, because you can literally see the salt on them. And this just depends on what kind you get. So for potato chips themselves are going to be only 180 milligrams, but that is only one type. There are literally, you can look it down and see pretzels, and they literally have salt crystals that are on there. I would imagine those would be quite a bit higher. For other ones that don't have any salt, maybe they're a little bit lower, but making sure just to be paying attention. If they have lightly salted, they might be only 85 milligrams. So be aware of certain things like that.
Again, even things per serving, right? So you have to really watch your servings, because it might be only 15 chips, you know.
Absolutely. If you start just pounding down certain things, it is amazing how fast it can be. And even things that where you're thinking, I'm having something nice and healthy and I'm having vegetable juice. Well, they have to preserve this in some way. They don't have any added sugars whatsoever. So just be aware, like V8 juice is a great, like if you need to be able to get vegetables, but you don't need, you're just on the quick grab and go. It tastes, for me, it tastes exactly like cold tomato soup. It sometimes can have a little bit more sodium than what we're expecting. So instead of it being that 140 is that sweet range, it's actually a little bit higher. And so just be aware of those types of things. If I was just to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, there would be hardly any. I think that whole bag of frozen was, I think, 96 milligrams of salt that are just naturally in there, versus if I'm eating more of all the juice has been just extracted and no fiber with it, it's going to be quite a bit higher. And they have to do that because it's preserved. It stays in this can and it can stay in there good for a long period of time, and bacteria won't grow in a really high salty diet. So remember, that trick is that 140 milligrams or less per serving.
But you can. Brandon, just a quick, Augustine says McDonald's French fries are 505% salt.
Ooh. 505% of your daily value. Is that what it is?
And he says, gee, I could have had a V8.
Right. And you could have had 2 V8s if you wanted to be able to have that same amount. So, yep. And that's where looking at fast food, I just recommend, like, if you have a favorite fast food that you absolutely love, go on the website right now, just play on your phone and just look it up and see where you're at. A lot of times as a dietitian, I don't want to try to just completely alter somebody's lifestyle. It's if I can move them in the right direction, that's going to help them out so much. And I've had people who are trying to lose weight, so the focus isn't necessarily cardiovascular on salt, but it's on calories. So even just simply looking at it and saying, oh, okay, if I'm trying to cut my calories, I can get a burger here that I normally get for 1,400 calories. I can get a similar burger for only 400 calories. So you're cutting off quite a bit. And then it's the same thing with sodium. You can get the low sodium options. So as you see, it says 100% V8 juice, 100% vegetables, and there's no added ingredients, but it still has a lot of salt. Versus if you get the V8 juice that has low sodium, you're literally getting it for a third of the amount of salt. So you're getting it for the natural sodium, but not for the added salt intake. So just kind of going through, those were just a couple of the basic things just to be aware of. Start looking at the back of it. Just track it for a day. It's amazing what you can learn about yourself if you just track your food intake for a day and just look at it and see, okay, if I want to check my heart, because I hear this dietitian talking a lot about salt, check my heart and see what my salt intake is for the day and see what I can do. When it comes to preparing your soups and foods, maybe prepare them from scratch. If you absolutely just love pizza, cool. Prepare it from home. Instead of having to do the sausage and the pepperonis that are the salty goodness and all that, maybe just cook up some chicken or even some canned chicken that are low sodium. Throw that on there and be aware of the cheese. Cheese can be high in salt as well, because that's how they cure the cheese. So just be aware of certain things. As well, increasing our amount of potassium, magnesium, and I think I missed one of those. Potassium, magnesium, and calcium. So increasing that a little bit more and then decreasing the amount of sodium will help with that fluid balance within our bodies. And I'll definitely check for next week of what foods, maybe if there is any kind of calcium in certain types of fruits and vegetables. I think that we just offered, again, if you have any questions or you have certain fruits or vegetables you want me to look up, just go ahead and put those in the chat below, and Martha will go ahead and just give me that information. And again, if you have any questions, feel free and throw those into the chat below. If you have any health concerns, or if you have a family member who you may be concerned about. If you have a chronic health condition, highly recommend just make sure, talk to a registered dietitian. I'm here, I'm available. It's really just a free, cheap way to be able to get answers. I'm more than happy to do all the research right now. I'm doing a big research on thyroid disease and Hashimoto's, and I'm going to be creating a support group for that, because a lot of people struggle with that type of condition. But again, here's my phone number and my email. So if you need to get hold of a dietitian, or just look in your local area for one, that can help out. And so again, lots of things that we talked about today. We are grateful for SNAP-Ed for producing this, as well as the Center for Healthy Aging for allowing us to be part of this community and be able to give back. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the program there with the at least PowerPoints. And was there any questions that anybody likes me to answer just right off the bat right now?
I just think these classes
I see a couple
are
heads
fabulous.
shaking. So.
Fabulous
Awesome.
class. They're really good,
Awesome.
Brandon.
And I thank you so much, everybody, for asking questions. I love it. Like fresh fruits and vegetables, like I don't know the breakdown of every vitamin content for every one, but it's not that hard to be able to look it up. And I could say, okay, we're going to look up oranges today. And I'm curious to see what is orange versus an apple versus a banana. Because you always hear there's so much potassium in bananas, but they're actually not even in like the top 5 of highest potassium. So it'll be interesting to look those up. So I appreciate everybody being here today. And again, if you know of anybody that wasn't here previously, we can watch the videos online as well. We have another class on Thursday at 3. And then for everybody, just tune in next week at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. Perfect. So thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Brandon.